As quite a lot of LARP games include some form of combat, having safe and functioning LARP weapons is a pretty important part of the game to make everyone have a good time. For this, it helps to do a bit of maintenance between events to prevent wear and tear, and as a bonus, giving them a longer lifespan as well. The hobby can already be expensive enough, and when you found the perfect weapon to fit your character, you want to keep it in a good condition for a long time. Today I'll be talking about the types of weapons that I have here in front of me. With the many different types of games all over the world, there are quite a few types of LARP weapons as well. But these are the ones that I am familiar with, and these are the types that are used most often in the European games that I play. So in this case, what even is a LARP weapon? The short answer is anything that can be used to hit others with safely. This doesn't mean that they're all weapon shaped. Want a frying pan, fish, or a book to hit others with? If it's made with materials that won't hurt if you hit someone with it, then yes, this is a LARP weapon. Generally, there are two different types. You have weapons without cores and weapons with cores. The ones without cores are more flexible, and if your LARP allows throwing weapons, it's usually these kinds. LARP weapons with cores are more sturdy and can therefore be used in weapon-to-weapon combat. It would look pretty silly if you're trying to duel with very floppy weapons. So the cores are there for rigidity. The reason you're often not allowed to throw or stab with cored weapons is for safety. Most of the cored weapons aren't made for this. And if you put force on the tip often enough, the core might poke through and hurt people, which is something that we don't want. So those are the more general characteristics. But let's look at it a bit more closely. So first let me run you through the general anatomy of a LARP weapon. This is a short blade which is rather old and therefore not safe anymore to use in a LARP game, which means I can disassemble this for you guys. The part that you can see on this LARP weapon is a top coating. This top coating used to be made with latex, but nowadays many companies are moving away from latex and are using other materials that leave a flexible and kind of rubbery coating. For this coating to stay flexible, it needs to be maintained. As you can see here, the coating is nice and flexible, but here it isn't. And this means that if I move this, you can see the coating breaking more and more. This is what happens if you don't actually maintain your weapon. The stretch is gone from the coating, and the more you bend it, the more the coating breaks. This is something that we can see often in weapons, but this is one of the reasons why you need to regularly maintain your weapon, because this can be prevented up to a certain point, and it will absolutely make your weapons last longer. Another thing that we can obviously see is that the weapon contains a wrapped handle. This can either be real leather or fake leather, but it's often just added for realism. Another thing I'd like to show you guys before completely disassembling it is what I mean with the cored weapons and what it means for the weapon. This weapon has a core. You can see it's still somewhat flexible, and the core is going all the way to the top. I can bend this, but not that much. You can also see where the core ends, because there I can bend this a lot more. This is also what I mean with don't stab or throw cored weapons, because the core is not extending all the way to the tip of the sword. I can flex this a lot more, because there is no core here. Let's see, I think the core in this weapon is running somewhere up to here. You can pretty much see it when I bend it. It's where the bending stops. This is also one of the reasons why people always say to not have the sword rest on its tip. This is quite a lightweight blade, but if you have a heavier blade, this also means that when you rest it, you might bend the tip, especially if you lean on it. If the foam bends too much, it can break and the core will poke through. This also means that if you stab people and it accidentally breaks, the core might poke through the foam and hurt people. So that's why we generally say don't stab people with cored weapons. Now that that's out of the way, and the fact that I've beaten up this weapon already quite a bit, let's actually show you guys what's under this. And for that, I can actually already show you just some of the damage. This is the damage that was already on here when I got it, and this is one of the damages that you can quite often see on LARP swords, as this is just one of the easiest places to get damaged. The white that you can see peek out underneath is foam. It depends a bit on the type of weapon, and I don't know exactly if it's the case for this weapon, but you often see weapons that have different rigidities of foam on this part than on the blade. Reason for that being, this is often used to parry, so you want this to be more sturdy than the blade, which is actually hitting people. So if it's softer foam, that will hurt less. Now, to actually cut this up, it feels really sacrilegious and it's quite scary because I only have one take, but let's see about this. And before I also cut up my table, let's just grab a cutting mat. I think the best way for me to show you guys what it actually looks like on the inside is to cut it up like that, so let's just go. As I already expected, I actually hit the core, so now we have to peel away the foam around the core. Okay, there we go. That's one cut-through Larp weapon, and as you can see, there is a core in here, which does not extend all the way to the top. So this part is just more bendable than this part. The exact construction of every Larp weapon differs a bit, so I'm not entirely sure about this one, but it seems that this is a single solid layer of foam with the outer, more flexible layer and then the core. And I think that this bit of the core is a more rigid bit of foam because this core bit can bend a lot more than this. It's either that or the core has broken here, which means that these are two separate parts and yeah. And this is pretty much a basic version of every Larp weapon. Some Larp weapons are made up out of separate layers of foam, sometimes with different rigidities and thicknesses to give the sword separate qualities or have the blade part be softer than the inner part. And there is also a category of stabbing weapons that I haven't really talked about before because they're quite specific, but those are cored weapons with which you can stab. They have a core, but either the last bit is a special kind of foam, there is something in there to stop the core from poking through. Now, I am curious in this case what it looks like here, because there is sometimes a difference, and because I'm cutting it open anyway, let's just cut this as well. That's a really nice clean cut. Okay, and weirdly enough, it's actually a throwback to my biology studies and actually dissecting stuff. For a really weird way, it actually smells the same. Anyway, from what I can gather by just feeling and looking at it, I don't think they used a different type of foam for the crossguard and pommel than the blade. But what I can see, and I'm not sure if it's visible on camera, is that there's a glue line here and a glue line here. And they used two separate pieces of foam for both the pommel and the crossguard, which were then sandwiched on top of the core like that. So I'm not surprised in this case that the blade with the core was made. So they inserted the core into the blade and then after that glued on the crossguard pommel combination like that. Wrapped it with a leather piece and the sword was done. And I think that is what we can gather from dissecting this sword. Let me now actually show you how to take care of your own stuff just to prevent this kind of stuff. Yeah, I'm really breaking it now just because I can and you don't often get that chance. Poor sword. Oh well, for science. To prevent your weapon from looking like that too quickly, it is best to do a bit of maintenance. Luckily, that is very easy. After every event, take a look at your weapon and check for obvious damages. Then, all you need to do is take a dry cloth and wipe off any dirt and grime. And that's it for every event care. Then, to keep your rubber coating nice and flexible, give it a spray of silicone once or twice a year. Do this outside on a nice day, but preferably not in full sunlight. And as silicone is really annoying to clean, do put something underneath. Leave it for about 15 minutes and then wipe off the excess with a cloth. That's all of it. But what if you do find some damage? These are the two weapons that I use most often for my own Larp characters and they're quite in need of a bit of repair. So let me show you how I repair these weapons with a coat of latex. For this we do need quite a few items. First of all, most important, latex. Make sure that this is actual rubber latex and not the latex paint that you get at a hardware store. The paint is a lot cheaper, but it's definitely a different thing than actual latex. Aside from that, some general painting supplies, something to apply the latex with, paint stirrer, something to mix everything on, a container of water, and because we're working with latex, I always like to use a bit of dishwashing soap to coat the paintbrush with. This way the latex doesn't stick as much on the paintbrush and you can actually reuse it. And then something to color your latex with. You can use regular acrylics and try and match the colors of your weapons, but I have these specific gold and somewhere else I got silver paints that I can match it really easily with. The most important thing for this is that the pigments or paints that you're going to use in the latex do not contain actual metals, especially copper. If you mix copper or metal pigments into latex, it will rot or disintegrate really easily, and that's not gonna make your weapon last very long. I also use a small pair of scissors to cut away peeling bits of latex and something to clean up spillages because I just always make a mess of stuff. So let's get repairing. Before we begin the repairs, there's one more check that we want to do, and that's on all the peeling edges. You want to make sure that none of this is sticky. If this is sticky, that might indicate latex rot. Latex rot is something that is actually contagious to other LARP weapons, and you don't want to have any of that in your house or near any other LARP weapons. So check any edge if it is sticky, and if it happens to be sticky only on a tiny edge, you can try and cut the latex away around it, repair it, see if it returns, but keep the weapon separate from any other weapon. If the area that's sticky is quite a large patch, throw away the weapon. I'm sorry, it's not salvageable and you don't want to have this happen to any other LARP weapon. Luckily, I don't feel any sticky edges on my weapon. I can even see previous patches that I repaired and it's still in a relatively okay condition. For me, I can just keep this. So on this weapon, we're going to repair this bit. I thought I saw something here. And on the other weapon, it's also mostly the crossguard. So, how do we repair this? First, you can grab your small scissors and you can feel if there's any edges that peel away really easily, because those we're just gonna cut off. This is mostly for edges that really peel away from the foam that air could get trapped underneath when we apply the latex. You can leave tiny cracks as is. As I mentioned before, we want to coat the paintbrush with some dishwashing liquid. Put a small drop on your finger and rub it into the bristles. Then onto the latex. With this, a little goes a long way, so pour out as little as you can. For the color, add a tiny bit of paint. Again, you don't need much, as latex will dry transparent and the color will show up pretty well, even in small amounts. Small amounts is a recurring theme here, as you want to brush the latex onto the weapon in coats as thin as possible. This makes sure the latex can dry evenly and there won't be any liquid trapped underneath. Do try to do this in long brush strokes and make especially edges of where you brush as thin as possible, so the layer of latex won't peel off as easily afterwards. With the very thin layers, you can leave it to dry for about 10 minutes and then apply the next layer. If you are lucky, you might even be able to use the same pour of latex and not have to remix the color. If you set it down for any amount of time, do clean out the paintbrush. Same if you notice it starts to get clumps. You can just clean it with some water, reapply the dishwashing liquid and continue painting. You also want to make sure not to paint over any half-dried layers of latex, as that might ruin the previous coat. The strength of latex is in many thin layers. When coating foam for the very first time, it is recommended to go with 10 to 15 layers. But as we are repairing existing weapons, we can go with a bit less. Mostly, make sure that all the foam is coated and there are no ridges that things can catch onto and rip off the latex. Latex layers do stick to each other better when they are fresh, so I do recommend not setting down the weapon for longer than 2 days if you still want to add more coats. In the end, because it was starting to show a color difference, I decided to do 1 or 2 latex layers over all of the golden parts. An extra bonus of this is that there are less seams and all of the new latex layers form one bigger piece. For the entire duration that the latex is drying, try to not have it touch anything, so just put it up on jars or something. I think so far I've done 6 to 8 layers of gold on the crossguard and the pommel one. It's still not perfect, but I think for now it's plenty. It covers all the gaps and holes, and this is completely safe for use again. What I also did with some of the leftover latex, because of course I poured too much latex at some point, is that I put a few coats on this wooden mallet. This is also to show you on what it looks like when you can't perfectly color match with the original weapon. Because as you can see, this weapon, well, it has all the stripes from original paintbrushes, and as the latex was also drying, I didn't really feel like completely color matching with the brown. But as you can see, yes, if you look up closely and you know that there is a different color on the handle, you can see it. But other than that, the latex dries pretty transparent. So as long as you work in thin coats with not too much coloring in it, you can perfectly repair weapons that don't have perfect color matching. But now you might notice that the latex is very sticky. Dust and grime will definitely stick to this, and you might be afraid that if you rub over it too vigorously, it might come loose again. So there is another step, and that's the last step before we're done repairing our weapons. And for that, we need baby powder and a paintbrush. that's all. And yup, this is pretty much as simple as pouring out some talcum powder and patting or brushing it on the freshly painted bits. It doesn't have to be fully coated in a thick layer, because then it would end up very white. We mostly just want most of the stickiness gone. And lastly, spray them with some silicone and the weapons are good to go again. Now that the weapon repairs are done, there is one more thing I'd like to go over to keep your weapons in a good shape, and that is storage. It would be a waste to grab your weapon before an event and notice that it has warped, but this is very easy to prevent. The most important thing to look out for is that the weapons do not touch each other when stored. So no throwing it all in a pile or keeping all of them in a single bag. If latex weapons are pressed together for a long time period, the latex might stick to each other and ruin the nice coat. Another thing is that if a weapon starts to show latex rot, it spreads a lot easier if the weapons are touching. As the weapons are made out of foam, they can warp or compress if certain spots get more pressure than others. So don't put them on their tips or place them on a very small hook, as it might leave some dents in the foam. Aside from that, the only other thing to keep in mind is to not store it in full sun or damp and wet places. So welcome to my costume closet, which is absolutely amazing for storing so many things, but not necessarily ideal for storing LARP weapons. Nonetheless, I made it work, and I guess in a way it's already a lot more space than most people have. But anyway, so the way that I store them is actually pretty simple. I got a set of stacked boxes here in the back. This is a craft weapon, you can ignore this. And this is my partner's LARP weapon, which is way too tall for me, but nonetheless it's a really cool weapon. And basically what I do is I sort them based on length. I put this one up like this. Make sure the angle is not too flat so that the tip doesn't bend. Put this one here, and I put this one here in the back. So not only do I make sure that they don't touch in that direction, I also try and place them next to each other. And this one actually goes somewhere here, which then leaves the smaller knife that I can put in front here. This way the LARP weapons do not touch when stored. They're still a bit closer together than ideally I'd like, but they're in this corner. I don't bump them over, they don't fall over. Like this, they're just okay here. Like I said, every time I take them out for a LARP event, I check them for latex rot anyway, which in my case is quite often. In the apartment we used to live before buying this house, I had put up a giant pegboard on the wall, and on the hooks I put those rolls of isolation foam. That way the LARP weapons had enough surface to rest on, and it made for an awesome display wall. And that's it! With this, your LARP weapon should be good to go for many more events. And because there is a lot of variety out there, and I'm just curious, what has been the weirdest or funniest LARP weapon that you have seen? And with that, thank you all for watching, and I'll see you next time. Welcome welcome to my... not in the mirror. So welcome to my So the way I figured out this is actually amazing for a lot of stuff, but not necessarily really ideal for recording. Wow.